But hoverflies certainly are a particularly important pollinator here in Essex and of course beyond around the world. Now, I'm not an expert in hoverflies. I have to stress that from the outset. So, in terms of your hoverfly ID inquiries, sending them to me, probably not worth it. Um, but I did get the opportunity to work in a previous role in a previous life with some hoverflies and their larvae as part of a reintroduction project in the Scottish Highlands. And I did fall in love really with the fantastic diversity of life cycles and life histories that hoverflies have, and really came to appreciate that as pollinators of 70% of our food crops, of generalist pollinators, of probably the most important pollinators by biomass in um, in the British Isles. They really are among our most important pollinators. So, with that question now answered, um, let's let's get into it. So, there are a huge range of species of hoverflies that live in Great Britain, and many of them, of course, are concentrated in the warmer corner of the country. Creatures like this rather wonderful jewel-like surface hoverfly with its lovely almost metallic gold back to its thorax and those lovely black and yellow stripes on its abdomen as an adult. This is not my photo, unfortunately, but I thought it was particularly beautiful, so I've put it in. This is our most common hoverfly here in Britain. This is the common marmalade fly, Ephicephalus balteatus, it's sometimes called. And I do apologise at this point. There are going to be quite a lot of scientific names in this presentation. A lot of hoverflies don't have common names simply because they've been so overlooked that the great Victorian naturalists that named all the moths didn't think to name them. Alternatively, they have been in so many schemes now run by various thoroughly well-meaning organisations to give common names to some of the more overlooked creatures among our fauna, that they have half a dozen common names. So unfortunately, the scientific names are what we're going to have to fall back on a lot of the time. So hoverflies belong to the order Diptera, the true flies. So their hind wings are absent. Absolutely nothing is wrong with scientific names. They are accurate, but I think some people prefer to hear an English name. They find them more memorable, and I can understand that. If you don't have a scientific background, it is sometimes nicer to have a common name. It gives you something to relate to and something to associate with the characteristics of that insect. So they belong to the order Diptera, the true flies. Their hind wings are absent or modified into these little halteres, these little drumsticks that they use to balance and also to make themselves maneuverable in flight, which they really, really are. So they appeared in the Eocene period. So they're younger than the Lepidoptera or the dragonflies that we've looked at in previous webinars. So they appeared, 50 million years or so ago, which was a good time to be a shark dentist if you lived in Walton-on-the-Naze, apparently. So just to orientate you in time, just after the end of the age of the dinosaurs and about the age of the London clay, with all the fossils beneath our feet. They're distinguished by a particular wing vein called a vena spuria, which is a wing vein that's unique to hoverflies. But to be quite honest, I don't think I could point to it. And I should stress again that hoverflies I'm not an expert on hoverflies. I just have got into them and got to know them over the past couple of years. And I've come to think they're absolutely fantastic. So most hoverflies are mimics of the aculeates, that is the stinging Hymenoptera, so bees and wasps. As adults, they're vital pollinators. They feed on nectar, and additional pollen they gets attached to their bristly hairs, so they can fulfill their part of their bargain with the simple flowers like this rather lovely, cow parsley that this Leucozona glaucia is feeding on. Similar to this Eristalis tanax, they love these big white umbellifers. And this is a mimic of honeybees, we understand. So you can see that the vague resemblance with the honeybees on the left, the domestic honeybees in this photo by Nick Upton, seen here feeding on some kind, I think it's some kind of Asteraceae. Yeah, so it's easy to see how a bird or another visual predator might just have to look twice to recognise that Eristalis tenax is not a honeybee that can sting. On the right here is Sericomia superbians, another rather beautiful, very furry little hoverfly, or quite large hoverfly, I should say. And on the left is the common carder bee, of which it's thought to be a mimic. And this, of course, is the hornet hoverfly, quite often mistaken for a hornet even by humans. I'm sure lots of photos of this hoverfly have been submitted to many an Asian hornet monitoring scheme. I don't doubt. And on the left, of course, is a Queen European hornet. Neither of these are my photos. They're both photos from WildNet by John Hawkins and Nick Upton, respectively. And they've right down to the yellow face. They've got this similarity to this this big social wasp, of course, the hornet. This is cogeneric with the previous hoverfly that we looked at. That is to say, it's in the same genus, so it's quite closely related as species go. This is Volucella pellicens. To me, it looks like it's possibly a mimic of a belted Galloway cow, but it's I'm not sure what Hymenopteran that's supposed to be. Although belted Galloways, I imagine they do have a substantial kick. So most of them are generalists. There are exceptions. They nectar from and pollinate many species of flowers. The females in particular need to eat some pollen for egg creation. They don't seem to have the long lifespans associated with pollinators that can feed on pollen and can fully process that protein for their own needs. But they do certainly take some pollen. But they've got bristly hairs. You can see underneath this pellucid hoverfly, the pollen attached to the hairs underneath its thorax, and they've also got bristly hairs around the abdomens. And in contrast to social bees, social and solitary bees actually, which tend to forage very locally to their nests, the hoverflies can travel really very great distances. And we'll talk a little bit more, or I'll talk about that a little bit more in a couple of slides' time. So this is a specialist pollinator. This is Ringia campestris, sometimes called the Heineken hoverfly. I don't know whether that's named after the beer or named after a discoverer. I don't know where that name came from. I hadn't actually heard it until recently researching for this presentation. And that's got a long snout, and inside it, that's the sort of sheath for a longer proboscis than most hoverflies possess, which is what allows it to drink from these tubular flowers like this Verbena bernardensis in a garden somewhere. And its larvae are associated with dung, so they seem to grow inside the dung, possibly feeding off decomposing bacteria. But it's sometimes found in areas where there aren't cattle. It's typically associated with cattle dung, but it seems that it is able to exploit other sources of food as well, but we're not entirely sure what those might be. And incredibly, some hoverflies are very long distance travelers, long distance migrants. So they travel substantial distances, including across the English Channel, without stopping to feed. Um, the common marmalade fly, part of its population, does this. And this species, the pied hoverfly, Scavia pyrastri, sometimes arrives in Britain in great numbers. And it's actually been recorded having met, sadly, a sticky end on fly papers on oil rigs in the North Sea. So it really is capable of crossing huge huge amounts of water. And it is, it is a tiny little beast, not much bigger than probably lighter than a housefly, I should imagine. It's a very small hoverfly. So really that they possess this ability to migrate. Insect migration is a fascinating field that we're just learning. But of course, when they travel these distances, they do sometimes bring pollen with them, and this opportunity to for plants to reproduce with plants that aren't close to them helps diversify the gene pool, and really can do a lot for populations to reduce inbreeding and such like. Um, so they are a bit special as insects go. There are one or two exceptions that aren't actually pollinators, that aren't nectar feeders. Lots of hoverflies, as we'll see, rely on aphids, and the genus Xylota, which has larvae which aren't associated with aphids but live in rot holes. They were one of the species I encountered quite a lot when I was surveying hoverflies up in Scotland. The Xylota hoverflies feed on the honeydew produced by aphids, but they're a bit of an exception among hoverflies. And also, just a quick note about some of the things that aren't hoverflies, because not every hymenopteran mimic diptera and fly that you might encounter is necessarily a hoverfly. On the top right, you can see a mating pair of conopsid flies, these from the genus Conops, that closely resemble hoverflies, but are in fact not hoverflies, although they are diptera. And these, as larvae, are endoparasites actually on species of Hymenoptera, including social wasps. And you think how closely that resembles a social wasp. It's quite interesting that adopts that appearance whilst also needing to get close to social wasps in order to parasitize them. So hold that thought in your mind. It might come in useful later on. Below it is another parasite, this time a kleptoparasite of solitary bees. This is a dark-edged bee fly. So there are lots of these on the wing at the moment. They're very cute, so long as you don't think about their life cycle, and they're well worth looking out for because they're on the wing very much at this time of year. And again, this is not a hoverfly. I believe it's Diptera, but it's a different family. And on the left, of course, we have the wonderfully named Anthophora plumipes, the hairy-footed flower bee, which is a wonderful creature, harbinger of spring, fantastic pollinator, really loves these little cultivated grape hyacinths in gardens, I've noticed. And this moves like a hoverfly rather curiously. You'll see them hovering and darting between flowers, and moving generally more like a hoverfly than the true solitary bee that they actually are. So perhaps this is an example, unusually, of an aculeate hymenopteran that could be mistaken for a hoverfly. But it's the life histories of hoverflies that in which I take particular fascination, and I've found it incredible, even just researching for this presentation, watching some of these aphid eating larvae at work. There's a wonderful video online, if you can find it, um, that features the larva of a marmalade hoverfly, of that very common, ubiquitous little classic hoverfly. and its larva is disguised as a bird dropping, and it feeds on aphids. This is the adult of the hoverfly you saw in the previous slide, by the way, and it feeds on aphids. And we'll talk about that in just a couple more slides. I've got ahead of myself again. Um, so, like all Diptera, they undergo complete metamorphosis, going through egg, larva, pupa, and adult stages, much like butterflies and moths, of course. And their larvae have a huge range of life strategies. Some of them are aquatic grazers, and some of them are active predators, living among the leaves of the vegetation and actively hunting prey. Whereas others have other approaches. So most of the underwater larvae, like that, the Calycera rufa that you saw in the previous slide, pine longhorn hoverfly, and these pine hoverfly larvae, the endangered species that I got to work with in a previous life, live underwater and breathe through a tube at the back like an extendable snorkel. They go graze on saprotrophic bacteria, so that's the bacteria that are involved in the process of breaking down dead wood. So they're not breaking down the dead wood themselves. They're grazing on the creatures that are doing um, in this. And here they are um, at the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland in their specially built breeding facilities. Off show, although they do have an exhibition about the pine hoverfly there. If you happen to be passing on your way to Inverness, um, they these jars actually froze solid last winter, and the hoverfly larvae were unharmed. And it's a bit of a mystery as to how that happened. But they managed to get through despite having been frozen solid and grow into beautiful little flies like this. It's much smaller than a red-tailed bumblebee, but perhaps it could be mistaken for a red-tailed bumblebee worker if you looked at it too quickly. Um, the mimicry doesn't always work, of course. Many of their predators are invertebrates that have no interest in that have no interest no, that aren't visual predators at all. Whereas some birds, including birds like spotted flycatchers, will quite happily catch hoverflies and won't attempt to knock the sting off before consuming them, like they would with a hymenoptera like a bee or a social wasp. So I've lost my thread because I'm talking about larvae, not mimicry at this stage. So this is Sericomia silentis. As its name suggests, it actually has a particularly loud buzz as it flies about. And they specialize in acidic conditions and peat bogs in particular, where their larva can sit in the very nutrient poor water with his breathing tube extended to the surface, um, breathing air essentially through a single breathing tube at the back. But some larvae, and these are probably the ones that you find most exciting, are predatory. They're active predators, and among these are the larvae of the common marmalade fly. So as a small larva, they grab aphids individually and eat them slowly from the inside. They're very graceful eaters. And as a larger larva, a third instar larva, the instar is the term for the life stages of a larva between its molts. So we'd use the phrase instar for growing caterpillars as well of butterflies and moths. So as a third instar larva, they're able to secrete a type of glue from their bodies, and these strange strange larvae that look a little bit like something between a bird dropping and fishing bait, a fishing bait maggot with a narrow front end and broad back end. Make their way up and down your roses looking for colonies of aphids, and will actually glue down a full colony of aphids and then eat them one by one at their leisure. while the rest of them are glued down. And there is some fascinating footage of this on YouTube if you look for it, and it's absolutely extraordinary to watch these bird dropping shaped larvae just gluing down and then eating these aphids. And this is another of the larvae of of a predatory larva of a hoverfly. This is Scavia pyrastri. Um, and this is a photo by Vaughan Matthews. So yeah, just to show you what they look like, sort of something like a fishing bait maggot, which is obviously also a dipteran fly larva, typically a blowfly larva, a little bit like a caterpillar but without the legs, and actively predatory. And they also live in the leaf litter hunting aphids there, because not all aphids live up on stems. Some of them live down in the leaf litter. For instance, this Sphaerophora scripta, the long hoverfly, I believe it's sometimes called, and there's its pupa on the left, on the underside of a leaf. So some hoverfly larvae live in ants' nests, like this. This is Xanthogramma pedicequum, which I believe is known as the superb anthill hoverfly. And what a name! I found this one in a community garden with one of the groups I was working with over in Malden, and I was really blown away by the vividness of the yellow of this little social wasp mimic as an adult. But they're thought to feed as larvae on the ant-attended root aphids inside black ant nests, which I find quite remarkable. So, in a sense, they're the insect equivalent of sheep rustlers, stealing the livestock from these ants. And how they survive in there and avoid the aggression of the ant farmers that are guarding the aphids closely is a mystery. And as with the large blue butterfly, there is always one that takes it a bit too far, and the Microdon hoverfly genus, the larvae will actually take ant larvae from inside ants' nests. So other hoverflies, I mentioned those conopsid flies, which are not hoverflies, and how their mimicry of social wasps probably allows them is probably intended to fool social wasps rather than predators. Um, One hypothesis is that these Volucella hoverflies, some of which, in contrast to that Volucella pellicens, are very convincing mimics of social bees. This particular Volucella bombilans is mimicking a tree bumblebee, but there are other species of Volucella. Sorry, I beg your pardon. There are other colour forms of Volucella bombilans that resemble other species of bee. And these, as larvae, live inside bee and wasp nests, and they eat the scraps and the rubbish that falls to the bottom of the nest, the dead larvae that don't make it, the dead adult bees that don't make it. And they might occasionally take bee or wasp larvae. Volucella zenaria that we saw in the previous slide, the hornet mimic hoverfly, I believe is particularly keen on eating the larvae of its hosts. But it may be that by eating scraps and eating fungi as well that fall to the bottom of a bee or wasp colony, that some of the Volucella are doing them a favour. But the hypothesis that they adopt this mimicry to fool the social bees is slightly undermined by there being apparently no connection between the type of bee that's nesting and the particular colour form of Volucella bombilans that emerges from it. So it's a hypothesis, one to bear in mind that might be a partial explanation of why some of these species are mimics. So there are one or two species that are not gardeners' friends, whilst many of them are our gardeners' friends, of course, taking the aphids and pollinating all the flowers. The larva of this rather wonderful golden hairy beast, the beautiful Narcissus bulbfly, um, as you might guess from its common name, eats daffodil bulbs. So the larva grows inside the bulb, consuming it from the inside, and they can be quite destructive of daffodils. But I think they're a rather wonderful creature, and they do give back by becoming a pollinator when they're adults. So I think they're rather wonderful. And this, of course, a hoverfly that's on the wing very much at this time of year. These little shiny cheloceas, their larvae live inside thistle stems, eating the plants from the inside. And sometimes by surveying the larvae is the best way to identify what species are present, because the adults are famously hard to tell apart. Some you can't even tell apart the adults by dissection, but you can tell them apart from their larvae. And there are other species, for instance, the aspen hoverfly, Hamschmittia ferruginea, that lives inside dead wood, and in there again grazes on the saprophilic bacteria in there. So, having introduced the hoverflies, and perhaps shared an idea of their diversity and their remarkable excitingness and their fantastic contributions to pollinating, who would not want to welcome some of these insects into their gardens? Species like this wonderful honeybee mimic garden hoverfly, seen here again on one of those white umbellifers that they so love. So flower-rich borders are good for hoverflies, as they are good for butterflies and moths. Simple flowers welcome most species. If you've got a wild area, let some of those big white wild umbellifers grow and flower, perhaps in the wild corner of your garden, because they suit a great many species of hoverfly. And simple compositae like thistles, knapweed, again, these suit hoverflies. So do indulge those flowers. But we've got to think also of the other life cycle stages, of course. The larva is the main event. If you were here when I had the moon moth out, that of course only spends a few days as an adult, and most of its life as larva, and hoverflies are no different. So you need to cater for the larvae as well. So this is the muddy edge of my garden pond here in Upminster, and you can see that it actually seems to have leaked slightly somewhat. So the water level is lower than it has been, but it's exposed this wonderful muddy area at the edge with this several years worth of accumulation of mud, high in organic matter. And species of hoverfly larvae like the droneflies Inchelis eristalis and the footballer Helaphilus pendulus will enjoy these muddy margins, and the adult hoverflies will lay their eggs in the mud. And I'm absolutely certain that I haven't had a good rummage, but I'm absolutely certain that there are larvae of those species down in the mud in that pond. And this, of course, is the adult of one of those species. This is not my photo, one by Vaughan Matthews. This is the hoverfly Helaphilus pendulus. So it's sometimes called the footballer, which is my favourite name for it, on account of its stripy shirt looking like some football team strips. It's also known as the sunfly in what's probably a mistranslation of its scientific name, and also the common marsh hoverfly, which is a more accurate translation of the first part of its scientific name. Of course, that's a species that specializes in living in the mud, and because they breathe air through their breathing tubes at the rear end of the larva, They can live in very low oxygen conditions, and very what would for a lot of organisms be very poor quality habitat. Um, some hoverflies, of course, live in the rot holes in trees, and we can simulate these environments. I understand Dr. Ellie Rotheray was actually aiming to create habitat for pine hoverflies, the species that I worked with in my previous life, when she invented the hoverfly lagoon. And the pine hoverflies weren't particularly interested, but a number of other species were much more interested in using hoverfly lagoons. Apologies to anyone who's seen these slides before. I did include them in a previous webinar on winter wildlife gardening. So these are a couple of hoverfly lagoons. Here is my highly accurate and very professional looking diagram of a hoverfly lagoon that I drew myself. And so this is half a milk bottle, usually a plastic 4 litre milk bottle cut in half, stuffed with leaves, with water added, a couple of sticks for the larvae to get out and also for the adults to rest on when they are ovipositing. And you can place that in a tray of leaves for the larva to pupate in. So the larva um, will graze on his saprocilic bacteria down in the leaf litter, and then he'll crawl up one of those sticks, drop down into the leaf litter in the tray below, and he'll form his pupa. I don't know if it's possible for a pupa to be cute, but I think that I do find the pupa of the pine hoverfly and the Batman hoverfly, Mythropiflorea, quite appealing because they do they call to my mind something like a little wooden mouse, retaining, of course, that tail that was their larval breathing tube. Remember to check in summer to ensure it doesn't dry out your hoverfly lagoon, because, of course, if it dries out, it won't do your hoverflies any good. Only use rainwater if you are topping it up, though. Um, and putting some moss on the top of the water so that as little as possible in terms of the water surface is visible, will keep the mosquitoes from ovipositing in it, which I know when I last spoke about them, this was a concern for some of you gardeners, quite reasonably, of course. But yes, using moss at the top of the hoverfly lagoon, on that surface to cover up the water will likely mean that it's not used quite so much by mosquitoes. And if you do need any further advice, do check out the Buzz Club. All of the conservation organisations need to work together in this day and age. And they carry on their website further advice about how to look after your hoverfly lagoon, and also they run schemes to monitor the larvae which will be using it. And this is the end result, I believe, of Dr. Rotheray's experiments. This is essentially a hoverfly lagoon, but cut directly into the stump of an old Scots pine tree, stuffed with Scots pine wood chips and moss. And this provides a monitoring opportunity and also a release site for the conservation bred pine hoverflies. So I've just included this partly for my own nostalgia, I suppose, but also because just to illustrate that people are working very hard to save and preserve some of the littler species and the undersung species that are on the edge, like the pine hoverfly. So you could also keep a compost area, which will allow some of the species with larvae that like to graze in the leaf litter happy, and you can allow a little bit of leaf litter to accumulate around the edges too. Don't clear it up, don't be too tidy, Tidiness is the enemy of uh, of garden wildlife. Some would argue, um, or excessive tidiness, I should say. Um, and quite often, these habitats related to the decomposition of plant matter are one of the habitats that's really missing from gardens, and so many creatures do need these to complete their life cycle. So do consider leaving your dead leaves piled up somewhere, and consider keeping a little compost heap like this in this photo by Autumn Barlow from the Royal Society of Wildlife Trusts. So avoid pesticides. Insecticides, obviously designed to kill insects. Um, they are in the main completely indiscriminate. They will kill hoverflies. And I would say that this probably goes for homemade remedies too. So even just using washing up liquid solution, which is a popular sort of folk remedy um, for aphids and other pest insects, I would recommend avoiding that, because that will kill any hoverfly larvae that come into contact with it. Washing up liquid, um, the enzymes in that will can essentially block the breathing holes of hoverfly larvae, and any insect that comes into contact with them. So it's still sort of quite nasty stuff if you're a hoverfly larva, and your food is being controlled with washing up liquid. So I would recommend avoiding those sorts of remedies too, as well as um, your more heavy duty pesticides. And yeah, don't be too tidy. Um, let a little bit of your garden grow wild. There's no substitute for this kind of flower rich grassland in the corner of your garden. This is was my garden at a previous address in Southwood and Ferrers, and we just let this corner around our pond grow wild. And I think we created quite a good habitat for hoverflies and bees. And also consider that as adults, they need to bask, they need to fill up on sunshine to maximize their energy. They love to bask, like this Sericomia lapona. Um, Unfortunately, a lot of my photos did come from Scotland, so there are quite a lot that aren't Essex specific. But that's because that's where I was mostly working with hoverflies. Um, so ensure that they've got some open space to bask, and also embrace ivy. Ivy is a wonderfully important plant. This Batman hoverfly. This is the first photo I've shown you of a Batman hoverfly, isn't it? I thought it would get out a lot more. Um, this is Myothropa florea. It's called a Batman hoverfly because if you sort of squint a little bit, you can just about make out on the thorax something that looks a little bit like the Batman symbol as beamed into the night sky in Gotham City's hour of need. So that's why this has become the Batman hoverfly, a rather lovely creature. And this one is basking on ivy at St Catherine's Church in Wickford, um, where monitoring was being provided by Wickford Wildlife Society, one of our community partners at Team Wilder. And you can the ivy it's a wonderful plant. It provides year-round cover for birds, and the autumn and late summer nectar is vital for migratory insects, including some of those migratory hoverflies, like Scavia pyrastri, and a few others. So it's a great plant to have around. If you've got mature ivy, treasure it. It doesn't kill your trees, and as I've said before, even if it did, standing deadwood's a very very important habitat. I'm sure ivy, I'm sure ivy can be a pain in some habitats, but if you can possibly stand to leave it, please do, because it's great for a lot of wildlife, and there really is no, as I say, no substitute for a little bit of flower-rich grassland. So do consider just letting your corner of your garden grow wild, or else seeding it with a wildflower mix, like in this photo of a meadow in Derbyshire, by James Adler. You can see in there there's all manner of buttercups and umbellifers and knapweed and scabious and all the good stuff that the adult pollinators will really enjoy. So thank you very much. I hope that's been of interest to you. It's certainly been a fascinating pleasure researching and revisiting this rather wonderful little group of flies.